Questo è un luogo che genera dialogo,
Qualcuno che si impegna, che si batte,
che approfondisce la conoscenza e sostiene la fiducia. È un crocevia dove si incontra chi desidera il vero, il bello, il giusto e il bene. È una testimonianza di speranza nel cuore ferito del presente. E tutto questo
con la propria vita.
esiste anche grazie a te.
Bene, buongiorno e benvenuto.
Good morning and welcome everyone. Leaven of Concord for humanity. So this is the message of Pope Leo during his first Mass as a Pope last May. This is a message for the whole of the Church, of God's people. In a time of war and violence, we feel the urgency of this message. How can we face the challenges of our time in the light of our faith, trying to have a say in today's society? How can we overcome individualism that seems to be able to actually overthrow everything at the moment? And it can actually help us contribute to our social life, to the realization of a real, authentic democracy. And once again, how can we give value to people, to the individual person in its integrity, in its relationship with the others, without falling back to anthropological limits, even in front of the technological challenges of our times. Today we have the opportunity to try and tackle these questions with our very distinguished guests. I thank them for being here. Luke Bretherton, Canon and Religious Professor of Moral and Pastoral Theology of the Oxford University. Thank you very much for being here. And Professor Pierpaolo Donati, sociologist and philosopher. He taught at the University of Bologna and is member of the Pope Academy of Social Science. Thank you for being here. So, just to start our talk today, I'll pose a question to our guests. What does it mean to live in today's society and to become constructors of relationship, Leaven of Concord for humanity? What are the most urgent challenges, in your opinion, and what kind of contribution can every and each one of us give in our cities, in our complex society that is now the victim of violence? Luke, you have the...
First of all, just want to say it's a huge delight and honor to be with you. I've heard about this meeting for many years, and so it is a joy to be with you. What I want to begin by saying is, I think to really answer the question that's just been set before us, we have to ask a much more fundamental set of questions, which revolve around how we understand this term politics. And underneath that, this question of what it means to be human. Now, when I say politics, if you're anything like my students, I'm sure you immediately think of questions of party politics, of rage tweets, and horrible bureaucratic state systems. I want you to put all of that aside and not think about that when I say the word politics. And politics really is crucial to what it means to be human. And this question of how can we survive, let alone thrive, as individuals when we can't do so without others. But this question of if I am to be human and I need others not like me to survive, let alone thrive, then I have to confront really the fundamental moral question of that politics presents us with. And this is the question of how I will respond to the stranger, to the one who is not like me, to the one who I find difficult or who I find annoying or I even find threatening, or whose way of life perhaps disgusts me or I find scandalous. When we are confronted with the stranger, with the other, with someone who's not like me, we have really one of four choices. The first choice is I can kill them. A lot of human history, a lot of contemporary moment, that is the answer to the question of the stranger. We see that in wars, we see that people killing each other all over the place. The second response is to create a system where I can control the other, control the person not like me, so I don't have to form relationship with them. And again, throughout human history, throughout we see today, people create systems that are oppressive, that enable them to control others and get them to do what they want so they don't have to talk to them or form a relationship with them. The third response is to make life so difficult, I persecute them, I make their life hell, that I cause them to flee, I cause them to run away. And so I'm left by myself and I don't have to deal with the other person. The fourth response is to do politics. And what I mean by that is I have to form some kind of common life with others who are not like me, who I might disagree with. There might be differences of power and what we can do, and we might have very different visions of what human flourishing should involve. But I engage in building a shared life with them without killing, without coercing, without causing them to flee. So those, I can teach you a whole very complicated class in political theory, but when it boils down to it, those are the only four options we have: kill, coerce, cause to flee, or do politics, by which we mean form a common life. Now, the ancient world understood this very well, whether it's ancient Greece or ancient Rome, and they understood that the polis, or in Latin, the patria, the city-state, if we think of Athens, was central not simply to their survival as individuals, but to their flourishing. They couldn't flourish as individuals without having some kind of shared life with others. But people who threatened that shared life, whether they were internal to the city, they were not citizens. In Greece, they were called the metis, or the resident aliens. If they were causing trouble, they had to be repressed. They were enemies to be repressed. Or if they were outside the city, outside the patria, they were also enemies. They were foreigners who had to be expelled or defended against. And so you saw in the ancient world a very strong distinction between friends, citizens, and enemies, others who are outside, as a way of creating this shared world of meaning and action. And into this ancient world comes Jesus Christ. And we know, and you'll be very familiar with, Jesus tells us the parable of the Good Samaritan. And in the parable, I'll leave aside the Levite and the priest who walk on by. But in the parable, we have the figure of the Samaritan and the Jewish man who has been beaten, oppressed, abused, is lying naked on the floor before him. So what is the relationship between the Samaritan and the figure he encounters, the stranger he encounters? Well, first of all, obviously, they are strangers to each other. They don't know each other. The Samaritan encounters a stranger. He also encounters someone who has been oppressed, someone who's abused, someone who is suffering. So it's a suffering and oppressed person he encounters. But also, crucially, he encounters someone who is his enemy. Like Serbs and Croats or Ukrainians and Russians today, Samaritans and Jews shared much in common. They had a shared cultural inheritance, but they also viewed each other as real threats to their way of life and treated each other as enemies. And so the Samaritan encounters an other. And so when we answer the question, who is the neighbor? Jesus commands us to love our neighbor, and he tells us a story that our neighbor, first and foremost, is the stranger, the one who is abused, oppressed, or suffering, and an enemy. And incorporated into love of neighbor is love of enemy. And then we discover in Jesus' teaching and in Jesus' way of life that in loving the neighbor, we are not just doing a kind and caring thing. We are also encountering Jesus Christ. We see this in Matthew 25. We have the story of the division of the sheep and the goats. And Jesus says to his disciples, when you clothed the naked, when you visited the prisoner, when you met in hospitality one who you did not know, you also encounter me. I was present with you in that act. And then if we look again at the Gospel of John or Giovanni in chapter 19, we see that Pilate brings out Jesus before the crowd and says "ecce homo" in the Latin, or in the Greek it's anthropos. Here is the human. So if we want to understand what is the true human, what is the true likeness of the human, we have to contemplate Jesus. We have to contemplate icons of Jesus. We worship Jesus. We want to get close to Jesus. We want to do what Jesus did, to participate in Jesus. So if we are to contemplate Jesus at that moment, when Pilate brings him out, who are we contemplating? We're contemplating one who is a stranger to everyone in the crowd. We're contemplating one who has been oppressed, abused, who is suffering, he's been beaten up and whipped. And we're contemplating one who has been judged an enemy of the state and judged an enemy of the religious way of life of its day. And so if we are to truly love our neighbor and participate in Jesus, we are commanded, not just invited, commanded to love our neighbor, who is first and foremost the stranger, the enemy, the one suffering. And today, though, we have a crisis of our ability not just to form a common life with fellow citizens, but also to form any kind of shared life with strangers, enemies, and the vulnerable and those who are suffering. And I think at the heart of this crisis are three things. What we face is a crisis of trust and suspicion. We don't trust our institutions, we don't trust our politicians, we don't trust the experts, we're surrounded by conspiracy theories, We don't trust the authorities to do the right thing, they're corrupt, etc. So we have a crisis of trust and an overabundance of suspicion. Second, we have a crisis of fear and anxiety. We're fearful for the future. We're fearful what's going to happen to the climate with climate change, what's going to happen with artificial intelligence and our relationship with technology. We're fearful about the economy and what's going to happen to our livelihoods. Are our jobs going to be taken away by AI? We are fearful about international relations and war, obviously the war in Ukraine, but also is China going to invade Taiwan? I don't know what it's like in Italy, but in Britain we have a mental health crisis where people are suffering anxiety and depression. So we have a crisis of fear and anxiety. And then thirdly, we have a crisis of relationship and solidarity. We're polarized, we demonize each other, we are plagued by an identity politics where whether it's an identity politics of the right, which says only people who look like you and who share your culture, any people from other nations or other religions, you're to fear them, you're not to trust them, or it's an identity politics of the left, a kind of hyper-progressive, woke politics that says there's nothing between us, there are those who are on the wrong side of history and those who are on the right side of history. So we're divided, deeply divided between ourselves. Now the answer to a crisis of trust, a crisis of fear, and a crisis of relationship is, of course, to the crisis of trust is faith. We need to nurture faith and trust between ourselves. To the crisis of fear, the answer is hope. And to the crisis of relationship, the answer is love. And it turns out we cannot do politics. We can't form any kind of shared life in our neighborhoods, in our localities, without faith, hope, and love. Without faith, we can't trust each other, which means we can't collaborate and cooperate to solve the shared problems we face, whether that's in health or education or with our children. Without a hope, we don't believe that we can move from the world as it is to the world as it could be if we change things. And so we end up with despair, cynicism, and a kind of nihilism, which causes paralysis. And without love, it means we have no solidarity, we have no compassion, we don't look after our children properly, we don't look after our elderly properly, we can't look after strangers, we're divided between ourselves. And I think underlying this crisis is the more fundamental crisis of the person. What do we think it means to be a person? And what kind of politics, i.e. forms of common life, enable us to form the quality and character of relationship that enable us to flourish, to become fully ourselves as persons in and through relationship with each other. And here I think the real problem is one of change. We are living through an intense period of change. And just to take a historical parallel, if we go back to 1850 and move from there to about the 1920s and 1930s, what we saw was everything changed. We saw changes in how we work, we have industrialization, the move to factories, the move from the country to cities, how we communicate, the advent of the telegraph and then the telephone, how we travel, the move from horses to trains and then cars and then airplanes, the rapid changes in technology and how we organize life together, the growth of modern states and all the rest of it. And humans struggle to cope with this change, and huge change in global markets, etc. And so we had two options at that point of how to cope with that change and how to bring order and stability so that we could live a modestly good life. One is democratic, and the other is authoritarian. And we see in T.S. Eliot a figure, they have the quote for this conference, he's thinking about this in the poem The Rock. We have the beginnings of Catholic social teaching in 1891 with Leo XIII, trying to make sense and read theologically these huge changes. And they're looking and they're saying, all across the board, they say we have to reject the authoritarian response that gives over responsibility to a single figure, whether that's a Stalin or a Hitler or a Mussolini, and give up responsibility for our shared life by giving it over to the one or to a system. Rather, as was embodied in things like the labor movement, we have to come together, and the most basic definition of democracy is the capacity of each person to have some say and contribution and participation in forming their living and working conditions. And so we have to come together, and this was the answer of Catholic social teaching and figures like Jacques Maritain and a huge range of Catholic and other thinkers saying we have to come together, and through forming relationship with each other and coming together to solve our shared problems, we don't just solve our problems, we actually discover our humanity, because we cannot really flourish as persons without a certain quality and character of shared life, of common life, through politics, and a democratic politics in which each person can contribute to the common life. And the authoritarian and totalitarian solutions, they form a common life through a return to that very ancient way of doing it, through creating enemies who we form a we, because we're a we against them, against the other, against the stranger. We treat them as enemies. So rather than loving our neighbor in the stranger, in the one suffering, in the one who's judged an enemy, we actually create a sense of solidarity through treating others as enemies and not loving them, but turning against them, and so killing, coercing, or causing them to flee. And I think in our contemporary moment, we've been through 20 to 30 years of intensely rapid change. Everything has changed. What does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a woman? Our relationship with nature and climate change, our relationship with technology and things like artificial intelligence. How are we going to organize society? Things like globalization and the structures of economic life. All of it is change, and we're all struggling to cope. Each one of you, I'm sure, is struggling to cope. I am. But we are confronted with the same challenge. Will we choose, as the church, authoritarian solutions to those problems? Or will we choose democratic ones? And if we choose democratic ones, will we learn how to love our neighbor through democracy and thereby discover both our own humanity and, I think theologically, discover the presence of Christ in the face of the suffering, in the face of the enemy, in the face of the stranger? Or will we deny Christ and turn to authoritarian solutions? And so when you ask what is the presence of the church today, I think like in the 1920s and 1930s, it's a similar challenge. Is will we work together with others to form more just and generous forms of common love that inhabit neighbor love? Or will we reject it in the name of making enemies of our neighbors? Thank you.
Grazie. Grazie Luca.
Thank you, Luke. There are so many interesting points that you have mentioned, sharing life, the crisis of trust of people, the issue of relations. Now we give the floor to Professor Donati. Thank you for inviting me, and I would like to say hello to all the people that have come here. I found the presentation by Professor Brotherton very interesting, and I would like to start talking about love. Love is not just a feeling. Feeling is a relationship. Love is a relationship. It would take a really long time to go through this concept. Many times we consider love as an attitude of benevolence towards the other, being good to the other as a projection. But as Pope Benedict said in Caritas Veritate, love is a relationship. And a relationship is a mutual action producing an effect, an emerging effect from our exchanges. We don't want to forget that. The issue of Christian identity, which is the subject of this session, is certainly loving your neighbor. That's the new mandate, and we'll address this issue in detail later. However, there is a virus which is particularly present in Western societies of Christianity in the West, not in the East, for example, in Russia. This virus is the virus of indifference. Even in Italy, Christian people are not threatened, really. They don't have evident enemies. There are some problems some places, but the real problem is that Christians themselves, Catholic people, cannot understand the difference that they have with respect to other religions, to other faiths. We all know that, especially among young generations, being Christians, Buddhists, Hinduists, Islamic is indifferent. That is, everybody as an individual can make their own choice. But in this way, we do not appreciate the Christian diversity. What is our difference? We are becoming indifferent, that is, without differences, and that's the ideology of multiculturalism. We are all different and all equal. So we're all different, but we're all the same. Whether you are Buddhist, Christian, Islamic, it doesn't matter. What matters is that you have your own idea. You can choose how to step into a candy shop. You just choose and pick the candy you want. But that's not the way it is, because Christian people have something different from the others. And that's what we should discover, or rather rediscover. So I would like to refer to the title of this session, the Leaven of Concord. What is leaven? Thinking of Christian identity as leaven and asking ourselves what Christian culture corresponds to this leaven. Many current problems emerge because religions are identified with cultures. In the West, there's a Protestant liberal kind of Christianity, basically, whereas in the East, in Russia, for example, there is orthodoxy, and that's different. So one wonders, how is it possible that someone like Trump is Christian? Trump is a Presbyterian, and his electorate is made up of evangelicals. A great percentage of that is that community supports Trump. And how can Putin be Christian, who is an Orthodox? And we know what these people do, people like Trump and Putin. What culture do they have? The fact is that Leaven is not culture. Lava can make culture flourish. the reign of heaven is like the leaven mixed by a woman using 45 kilos of flour to make bread. That's what we read in the Holy Scriptures. And leaven is something hidden, something tiny with respect to the bread to be made. So I would like to propose this comparison. Leaven is the faith in Christ, and it is something hidden, something tiny with respect to the mass that has to ferment. And this leaven gives rise to different forms of bread, that is, different forms of culture. If bread is culture, all cultures must have their leaven, and that's the Christian level. And the Christian leaven is different from the leaven in all the other religions. It's important to understand this. For example, with respect to Judaism, the law is the Torah, the 5 books of the Pentateuch. So the leaven is to abide by the law for Jewish. Now we cannot go through Buddhists, Hinduists, and Islamists, but we see that the leaven for them is to get on well with the others, but still within their own community. For example, for Islamic people, it's in the community of the Ummah, whereas in Christianity, the message of Christ is universalist. That is, this leaven must go and ferment all kinds of doughs, all kinds of flours used to make bread. And for sure, we will have different shapes of bread. In every country we go, we find different kinds of bread. But if it has fermented, it will have the same kind of leaven. That's important for the Christian identity, which is there but cannot be seen. It exists only when we see the fruit of the process of fermentation, like bread with yeast. And it is present in all the cultures, but it's not the same in just all the cultures. When it coincides with one specific culture, there is nationalism. For example, Russian nationalism with Putin, or the American nationalism with Trump. And for this reason, we cannot accept the idea that Christian identity corresponds to a monistic philosophy, that is, I am I, just one identity, that is the Christian. No, the Christian is not that. It is not a fixed, pre-established identity. It is a fermenting identity, like the leaven, like the yeast, that makes the dough grow without building something separately. Leaven expands inside the flour, inside the dough. It is not a separate community. That is what the church is, and that's what Don Giussani used to say. As our chair said, Pope Leo referred to that, and the sentence we are commenting on, Leaven of Concord for Humanity, is by Don Giussani, because the church is leaven. This is a bit of a different perspective when you look at the church as a hierarchical structure. It is true that there is a hierarchy, but if we reduce the church to hierarchy, we are totally wrong. So to create relations, as we are suggesting in this session today, we should move away from the monistic semantic, that is this idea of identity, I am I, that is the Christian, such as A equals A. The Christian is not that. And even according to modern semantic, that is dialectic, is not relevant. We are not what the others are. I'm a Christian because I'm not Buddhist, I'm not Islamist, I'm not from another culture, from another religion. Well, these ways of thinking that are referred to as the semantics, the monistic and the dialectic one, there's no way out. We need a relational semantics. Semantics and relational anthropology and relational thinking is something that the Catholic Church has in its own because of the Trinity. God is a relationship for us as Christians. God is relationships, the Trinity, but since the world was created by God, God acts as a Trinity ad extra, out of itself. And God created the world relationally. Everything is relational in the world. But we have to find this out, because relationality is not a prefixed identity. And in the same way, Christians are not a prefixed identity. They are the leaven. That is the meaning of the sentence. If we look at Christianity as leaven, we take a very different perspective. We should consider that common goods are not things as they used to be. The commons were the prairies, the woods, the lands that the towns used to have in common and that the families would distribute among each other throughout the year, and that is not possible anymore. In a certain way, we should also review the sense of polis, of the city, of citizenship, and so on and so forth. All these issues should be looked at from a relational perspective. They're not goods, they are relational goods. They consist of relationships. If we don't adopt this kind of culture, we won't create true ties, true relations. Ties imply a culture of otherness. Who is the other? The other is the one that constitutes me. As Christian, I don't like thinking in terms of a fixed identity. Of course, there is an original principle, as Luke Bretherton mentioned before, a new mandate, a new love. However, the way of life, culture is a way of living in which then I am other for the others, and there are the others for me in otherness. So there is this mutual exchange of goods in the friendship, and it is there that we find a sense of humanity. But we also should understand about the love that Professor Bretherton mentioned, that Christ's love is not just loving the others in a general sense, as recommended in all other religions. Jesus said, you should love one another just like I have loved you. That's a unique love because he loved in a very specific way, that is through the gift, giving himself in the other. That's the only way that authentic relationship can be created. All the other relationships are not authentic. They are driven by utilitarianism, by exchanges. I give you something, so you give me something else. So these are operational, transactional relations, doing something together, but the true relationality is this. So within Christian culture, to be able to find one's identity, the point is this. We should go against the idea that Christians constitute separate communities. They're not. The letter of Oniet say that Christians are not different from the others in all respects. There are no differences. They are just citizens like the others, but they bring the difference of the leaven that they have in themselves. This leaven is not somewhere else. That's the Christian difference. If we don't take this direction, we can talk and talk. We can talk about concord and peace and union, and those are generally considered as human constructions. I have analyzed different religions, Judaism, Islam, Hinduism. In all religions, peace is seen as a human deed, human action. But Christians don't think in peace in those terms. But we do that, actually. Why shouldn't we do that? Because for Christians, peace is a gift from God. It is an action of mercy. Jesus say, love not according to your humanity, but the way I loved you. So there must be the gift of mercy, of grace, for this peace to be true. So Christians should be the vehicle for that grace, because it is the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, that is this mercy, this grace. That's what makes it different. It's not a difference because of superiority or because they should have a sort of privilege or higher status. No, we're not longing for claiming a difference. We should emphasize the added value of being Christian in the society. This is, in my view, the leaven of which we are talking about. Thinking of Christianity as leaven with respect to other ways of thinking peace, such as accord, an agreement. Now we are looking at this between Trump and Putin and Zelensky. We say that there should be agreements, negotiations. That is the trap of modernity. As Luke said, now we think of politics in Hobbesian terms as a contract. No, if we think that that's peace, we do not establish any tie, any relationship, because peace will be obtained through new relations, new ties among the populations and the states of which we are talking about. I hope I was clear, and that was the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Grazie Pierpaolo.
Thank you, Pierpaolo. In this second round of questions, I'd like to carry on the same topic. We talked about the crisis of the individual, of the person. Now the theme of the leaven and the relationship with the other. So I'd like to ask Luke, can you help us understand better the difference between individual and person, the relationship between a person within a society, the intermediate bodies, and in the creation of a real democracy? Thank you.
Great question. So I'll try and answer it in a kind of straightforward way. So I think going back to what I said before, I can't be me without you. I can't grow as a individual into a person and fully realize myself without a certain quality and character of relationship with others. Now, at a very fundamental level, a child, a baby that doesn't have the right relationship will die. Or a baby that doesn't have the right kind of relationship, literally, we know, doesn't form the right synaptic kind of connections in their brain. And equally, we know if we get ill, we need help. If we need to learn anything and grow in our knowledge and understanding or capacity and skills, we need others. So we cannot survive, let alone flourish as individuals without a certain quality and character of relationship between us. And that is just a fundamental truth. Now, we cannot do that, as Pierpaolo suggested, we cannot do that in the abstract. So Immanuel Kant, very important German Enlightenment philosopher, had this idea that we should love the brotherhood of man. Who is that? It's an abstract thing. You can't love everyone all at once. We have to love and grow in our capacity to act with and for others through forms of intermediate or more local forms of association. And this, whether it's in the family, whether it's in a football club, playing football with your friends, whether it's in a reading group, whether it's in a disability support group, whether it's in a union, whether you volunteer with your local fire service, whatever it is. In Italy, you have a wonderfully rich tradition of these kinds of associations. And whenever I go to Italy, there's always some wonderful parade and march through a town in some festive celebration of the fire service kind of, or the ambulance service, or whatever it is. So you have a wonderfully rich tradition of these local forms of association. And this is crucial because how do we become persons? We only become persons through our participation in these forms of association. And this was a crucial insight of Catholic social teaching. It's very explicit in the French Catholic political thinker Jacques Maritain, who understood that democracy, if it's going to really enable human flourishing, for us to really grow into being persons, cannot be, as Pierpaolo said, based on, and you will forgive me, I'm English, I just owe you penitence, I'm a dreadful sinner amongst you. Thomas Hobbes, who Pierpaolo mentioned, was a terrible English philosopher who had a very bad influence on political thinking. And he was key, along with a bunch of other English philosophers, mostly who went to my university, Oxford, I'm sorry, who said that society is based on individuals, and individuals form contracts with each other, and those contracts are the basis of society. So that fundamentally the vision of the human was individualistic, not relational and social. And so then we have a democracy which is not about forms of association coming together, whether that's churches, trade unions, guilds, local neighborhood associations, to form a common life between those associations. And then from that emerges ideas about the common good. Should we build more houses or create more parks? Well, we come together as associations to determine that. No, on Hobbes's idea, there is no such thing as society. There are just individual choices, almost like a market, which are aggregated, and the sum of those individual choices is what we should do. And so it's a kind of collectivism of individual choices, not a rich relational association. And that is part of our problem today, is increasingly, there's a great American sociologist called Robert Putnam. He pointed in America in the 1950s, people used to join bowling clubs and used to bowl together. And now people in America, they bowl alone. They don't form bowling clubs to go bowling. They just bowl alone. And rightly, Putnam sees this as a problem because it breaks down our capacity to come together with others, deliberate together, and act together with each other to share our common problems. Because we learn how to speak together and we learn how to act together through forms of association, like bowling clubs, like trade unions. And when you get rid of those and we're just individuals in a market or subject as units of social administration to the state, then we're easily manipulable. A demagogue like Trump can arise on social media. We can be persuaded by conspiracy theories because we're not embedded in rich forms of association. And so I think hopefully that gives an answer to your question about why democracy needs associations, and to flourish as humans, we need associations. And so this linkage between becoming persons, rich associations, and the health of democracy is absolutely crucial. And John Paul II in Centenimus Annus draws this out very clearly. He talks about the authentic democracy entails, demands structures of mutual life and participation, like trade unions and other forms of association.
Grazie, proseguirei.
Thank you. I'd like to ask the same question to Pierpaolo Donati. We need the others so to make it possible, to make an authentic democracy possible through associations, intermediate bodies. You've studied for all of your academic life the theme on relations. In your two latest books, you talk about relationship among men and with God. So I would like to ask you to just carry on from what Professor Bretherton was just saying. How much is, or rather, how important it is to keep the relationship with the other alive in our society? Thank you. Well, I obviously totally agree with what Luke just said. But I would like to start from the anthropologic issue. What do we see as a person? The Catholic Church should reconsider a lot of things. Philosophically, we still think that a person, as Boetius said, as an individual substance of rational nature. So this is actually the real root of individualism. And then St. Thomas also draws inspiration from this. And this is relevant actually because also St. Thomas was read in an individualistic way because St. Thomas underlined the Aristotelian aspect, and the relationship wasn't seen as the center. Whereas the difference between St. Thomas and Aristotle is that there is a third level of reality that goes beyond accidents and substances, and is that of relationships. You can read that in my books, but anyway, there would be a lot to say about all this. Anyway, the Church needs to rediscover relationships because we still think that a person is an individual should be self-referential. It shouldn't be a lot of things. So when we say relationship, what kind of relationship are we talking about? The relationship that makes the person human. And what is this relationship? If I ask myself, what are my relationships that make me more human, that humanize me? I will have to think about it and have to ask myself this question from this perspective. But this is something that we seldom ask ourselves. So this is the reason why the associations we have are not real associations, real intermediate bodies, because they are still submerged by individualism. Because if we have an association, but then everybody acts for himself or herself, well, the association doesn't really exist. There is no community. There isn't anything that an association should be. The Church, and the Catholic Church in particular, needs to rediscover that this is the first institution of the civil society. The Church as a Christian faith, Christian reality, as Alexis de Tocqueville used to say, that the Church is the first institution of the social society. When Luke talks about a polis from Aristotle's point of view, well, Aristotle sees politics as the result of a civil society created by families that create the political power necessary to govern. So this is a society that governs itself, to manage itself. Whereas today we see politics as something that is far apart from civil society. And there is a part of the Church that prefers to talk to the political power rather than to the civil society. So this is the big mistake we make. Why don't we have more associations in Italy? Well, we talk a lot about intermediate bodies. Let's think about the Forum of Family Associations, a very, very interesting reality, but it is not actually encouraged by a society. These associations have to really work hard to find resources and be present and do things. So this is very difficult, whereas associations are the only thing that can make us flourish. And I become more human if I can create relationships with the other. First of all, friendship, because friendship is very important. Let's think about young people at school today. Ask them if they have friends at school. They normally don't. It's really very sad. It's a disaster. It's something that I have repeatedly encountered in my researches. If you ask young people if they have friends at school, they will say no. And this is a disaster, because if you don't create friendships when you are a child or a teenager, then, well, you will never be able to create a friendship. So we need to understand that our happiness depends on the friendship with others. I know that I have already talked too much, so I'll stop here.
Thank you. I have one final question. In the relationship with the other, not always friendship is generated. Not always there is a welcoming approach to the other with respect to what we have to say and what we try to transmit. Sometimes, even in cultural debate, public debate, proposing the truth over men introduced by Christian experience may generate not always favor and welcoming, but also sometimes indifference, as was mentioned before. Sometimes there is misunderstanding, other times there is hostility. So the last quick question is, what is the value of a testimony where there may be misunderstanding or obstacles? Or if we reformulate that, is a testimony valid only when there is acceptance of the people that we are in front of us, or is it also valid where there is hostility and indifference?
Yeah, no, it's a wonderful and important question. I think the the key thing here is we have to look to Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ was met with hostility, with misunderstanding, with anger and rejection. How did Jesus respond? And so the worth of witness is not dependent on the reception. The worth of witness is about bearing witness to God and God revealed in Jesus Christ. And it is the reception of that witness by God which is the first thing that matters, not the reception of the church by society. But crucially, what do we see is in Jesus Christ, we see God's first word to a sinful humanity, and we're all sinners, is yes. God doesn't respond with no. God responds with yes. Yes, I love you. Yes, I am for you. Yes, I will save you. And then the no follows from the yes. Don't do this, don't do that, because that's not good for you. Because I'm so for you that I'm prepared to give my only son to die for you, that I think probably doing these other things is a bad thing. But my first word, God's first word, is yes. The problem for the church is, it's often its first word is no. It says, no, we're against this, we're against that. And it has no creative yes. So a good example would be the challenge of assisted suicide or euthanasia. In Britain, I don't know the situation in Italy. I think it's a very good example. The first word of the church, and a Catholic, Dame Cicely Saunders, came up with hospice care in the 1950s because she saw the way modern medicine was going and that it was going to lead to assisted dying or calls for assisted dying because medicine, because of modern technology, would keep people alive beyond when they would have otherwise stayed alive. And so she set up hospices, which was a yes to care for the suffering dying. And hospices are open to anyone. You can be a Buddhist, a secularist, a Marxist, whatever, and still go to a hospice. And in a hospice, you can touch, see, taste, and smell what good care for those who are suffering in their dying looks and feels like. And that is an act of profound witness to God's yes in Jesus Christ, experienced in an institution that embodies the hospitality of God to the suffering and to the love of neighbor. I think a contrast, certainly in America and Britain, is with the abortion debate, where the church's first word was no. It never really came up with a constructive alternative. In the American and British context, the church, if it had massively invested in pre- and antenatal care, in welfare provision for mothers, whether they're married or not, I think we would be in a very different state of play when it comes to the debate about abortion in America and Britain. Because rather than society reacting to the church saying no when it goes, get lost, it would have heard a profound yes, an affirmation of the value of both the mother and the child, like the hospice care in relation to the question of euthanasia. And so I think the challenge of Christian witness is always to do the difficult imaginative, creative yes work of formulating a meaningful embodied yes to a question that society is asking, and then the no can be articulated in the context of a yes. And the challenge for the church is not to begin with no, to begin with yes. And in that yes, it is also bearing witness to God's yes in Jesus Christ.
Pierpaolo, prego.
Dunque, Luca.
Well, Luca has already mentioned, and I agree with him, how to overcome conflict, diversity, and opposition. For a relational philosophy and anthropology, the real problem is not opposition, in fact, but it is the absence of relationship. It is the rupture of relationship, where the relationship is broken, in the sense that the other doesn't want to see you, doesn't want to talk to you, doesn't want to know anything about you. You're dead for them, and you don't exist anymore. That's the opposite of love. Love is how nice it is that you exist. And then there is a relationship that says, you don't exist for me. This is the black hole, so to say, the black box of the relational approach. What to do when the relationship is not just about conflict. Because when there is a conflict, there is a relationship anyway. And there, we have to think about what kind of relationship we want, how we want that relationship to evolve. But there is already a relationship. So the issue is about how to make that tie evolve. Trump and Putin are in a relationship. They have a link. There is a tie. And it is not the relationship that we're talking about. Why isn't it that? Because we must think about the kind of relationship. I talk about relational reason. The relational reason is a new kind of relation. Those who are familiar with Max Weber know that there is a value for the rationality. There are different kinds of rationalities that are utilitarian, but the relational one is never considered. What is the relational reason? It is the reason of relationships. What reason is there in the relationship I have with that person? What reasons is there in the relationship that I have with you? That's not about the reason why I stay with you. It's the reason in the relationship, the quality of the relationship. And why do I have that kind of relationship with you? What is the quality? What is the kind? What are the reasons behind that relationship for which it should exist or it can change? We should think about relationships from the point of view of the intrinsic reasons behind a relationship. This is a completely new way of thinking. This has never been discussed. We think about rationality as a way to look at something, pursuing an aim with a certain means, but that's pure individualism. Instead, we should focus on the reasons behind relationships. Why do we want to stay in a relationship? In what kind of relationship are we in? Are we having a conflict? Why? What is the reason why we are having a conflict? Because we think in different terms, you want to go to some places and I want to go to other places. I give you a banal example. Many separations and divorces in Italy are due to the fact that in the couple, one wants to go to the beach and one wants to go to the mountain for a vacation. Since they can't find an agreement, they just split up, they break up, and they get a divorce. Maybe it's not just a question of the holiday destination, it's about maybe the pet or other very banal things. Why don't these people ask themselves a question? Beyond the fact that I want to go to the beach and you want to go to the mountain, what is the reason behind our relationship? That is what should guide us. It is the reason behind the relationship. It's not the link, the relation as a constriction. All modernity sees the relationship as a constriction. There is an ambivalence that is always present in our language. We say relationship and we say tie, but if we say tie, we stress the constriction, the forced situation that is implied. If I am a friend to someone and this someone has helped me, if then they ask me for help, I feel forced in a way to give back for that help. So in the relationship, there is an element of constriction, of constraint, but constraint can be good or can be bad. That's why relations can be good or can be bad. And if we don't we don't learn to manage relationships and have a culture of relationship, we can't construct good relationships, we can't build associations, we can't create relational goods because we don't focus on the relationships, on the intrinsic inner reasons underpinning the relationships, the reason why that kind of relationship looks like in a certain way and not in another way. Based on the technological environment, instead, today we see relationships in terms of communication and not as an exchange and an emerging effect of an exchange. We only see the transfer of communication. Relationships is the transfer of communication. I send you a message, I send you a picture, I transmit a bit of information, but a relationship is not something like that. It's something different. We don't see the relationship in the right way because we don't have a relational culture. I cited Boetius before. If a person is an individual, the individual substance of relational nature, where relationality is simply the ability to reason, where this wouldn't be enough today. And the problem that we are facing in the church too, in my view, is really serious, and I'm just going to hint at that. And it is the fact that we are losing analogical thinking. We are not using analogy because new technologies kill analogy. If I talk about God's heart, I understand that by analogy as a human heart. But if human heart in media communication is made a virtual reality, is made a virtual relationship, it is not analogical anymore, all Christianity is swept away, just like all the other religions. If you affirm something that is analogical, it cannot exist because only virtual reality, only digital is there now. So I'm just hinting at this now to say that there are big challenges, and only with a culture of human relationality will it be possible to challenge artificial intelligence and the entire world of artificial realities that, as Pope Leo mentioned, Leo XIII addressed the social question, and Leo XIV now has to address the question of artificial intelligence, because artificial thinking is sweeping away analogical thinking. We are being analogical here. We are all human beings, right? But if our identity, our profile is only digital, we won't have analogy anymore. Everybody is an artificial reality. So this is really a terrible issue. So let's go back to the leaven of Christianity in these terms too. Thank you. Thank you very much. I would like to thank our two guests because I believe that they have really helped us getting into the title of this session and finding possible ways in our time to be leaven of Concord for our society through authentic relationships that are back at the center of our lives. Father Giussani used to say that the spring of culture is the experience of a lived company. As long so that these relationships can still flourish and be created, we all have the possibility to continue to experience these days of the meeting and, as you know, to support directly this experience of the meeting of Rimini that is truly committed to nurturing these authentic relations. So in continuing your day at the meeting, I all encourage you to go to the Dona Ora, Donate Now desks so that this story can continue to grow. Thank you very much for your attention, and thanks again to our guests.
Questo è un luogo che genera dialogo,
Qualcuno che si impegna, che si batte.
che approfondisce la conoscenza e sostiene la fiducia. È un crocevia dove si incontra chi desidera il vero, il bello, il giusto e il bene. È una testimonianza di speranza nel cuore ferito del presente. E tutto questo
Proporre con la propria vita.
esiste anche grazie a te.